but also. But what remains found is grounded by the architects, because the architecture has this character of making things that as a temporal and not only a spatial extension. Well, I thought that I was not allowed to speak of the architecture like, I know the essence of the architecture as a philosopher and so on. I just, stay at the margins of this topic in order to say what are the impressions, not of the philosophy, but of a professor of philosophy, me, about the current state of architecture. Secondly, second precision, I'm not crying on the destiny of the relationship of philosophy and architecture. I'm not sad. I have simply an irritation of the left eye, so that this gives the impression that I am sad, but I'm not sad at all. It's like the bulldog. It seems to be sad, but just in order to give. So the idea is to point out, like Derrida suggested in La Verità Peinture, not the ergon, the work, but the parergon, what stays in the margins of the work. And those parerga that I have 35 minutes, is it? Now 33. Okay. And those parerga are four. First, the contingency. Secondly, the supplementarity. Fourth, the monumentality. And third, the monumentality, and fourth, the documentality. I don't explain what is this obscure word now, because I hope to explain them in the presentation. And then I start with the contingency. As you all know, Derrida said that deconstruction is what happens. And what happens among many things in the world now, and creates this relationship between philosophy and architecture. I have an hypothesis. The real reason is a problem that concerns neither philosophy nor architecture, but contemporary art. Well, this is a case of contingency, but not a real contingency. It is a surprising contingence between nature and culture. But what is a cultural contingence is a quote from Marcel Duchamp, who said, "A point I want very much to establish is that the choice of these ready-mades was never dictated by aesthetic delectation. This choice was based on a reaction of visual indifference with at the same time a total absence of good or bad taste. In fact, a complete anesthesia." With these words, Duchamp, in fact, underlines the commonsensical view on the art of last century. Art has nothing to do with the beauty, not necessarily to do with the beauty. There is not a necessary relationship between art and beauty, and everything can be a work of art. And this creates some problem, because, for instance, close to Boston exists MoBA, and MoBA is a museum of bad art, and the problem on the museum of bad art is to justify why this work of art stays in this museum and not in another museum, because yes, in fact, this is bad art, but in fact, it's not surprising to go in a gallery and to find something like this. Why not? And this because the assumption is that everything can be an artwork, This is the conceptual idea that stays not only in Duchamp's mind, but in the commonsensical view of all the people now about art. Not exactly all the people, but there is a commonsensical view that everything can be, and there is what Arthur Danto called the transfiguration of the commonplace. I take this object, I put the object on another part, I put a title, for instance, Melancholy in the Morning, and I put a signature, which is equal necessary, and this became a work of art. This is not only, I repeat, the idea of Duchamp, it's the idea of practically everybody. He gave also an experimental proof. This Kaninchen is owned, is not exactly the Kaninchen of a painter, a good friend of Jacques and Marguerite Derrida, Valeria Adami. The name is Ego, but the interesting thing is that 4 years ago, Valeria Adami and me were walking in Turin, speaking about the commonsensical idea that everything can be a work of art. And at a given moment, there are many people saying, oh, how is beautiful. They was not prepared. They was not able to see that a real work of art does not need to be beautiful. But at a given moment, we decided, and if we say that he has been exposed at the MoMA, and a lady came and said, oh, it's beautiful, this dog, and Valeria Adami, it has been exposed at the MoMA. And the lady has no sign of surprise. It's very common. In fact, there have been horses has been exposed, human being exposed, bones exposed. So why not the Valeria Adami's dog should not be exposed at the MoMA? And what is important is that this lady was not a philosopher, an architect, an art criticist, but simply a worker in a town. And so this is the real basis of the radical transformation of our relationship to art from Duchamp on. Note, here happened something surprising that leads us in the direction of architecture. Surprisingly enough, we admit that everything can be an object of art, but we don't admit that everything can be an object of design. I speak about a commonsensical ground, but in fact, both objects have a design, of course. But we suppose, the common sense suppose that the object of left, of right, sorry, is design, and the other not. Is not design. Also, this is mysterious. Like if design play a supplementary role to art, because since art has no more a relationship, a close relationship to beauty, so that design need to replace the need for beauty in a supplementary way. And this is very clear because in many cases the search for beauty and for simplicity is much more important for design than function, which is in a sense paradoxical. Other empirical tests. This is a room of a hotel in Naples. In this hotel, there were 50 professors of philosophy in 2009 in a big conference on Derrida. And all the 50 professors of philosophy, I would not say that they were genius, they were all genius, but they were not stupid, in fact, I suppose. Nevertheless, they all needed to call the concierge in order to know how to switch on the TV, and it's because there was an aesthetic rule that supposed that the button should be hidden because the button is not beautiful. There is an ugliness of the button, and when you are at home, you know your TV and you can find the button. But when you are in the hotel, it's a catastrophe. Not that sometimes also the people of the hotel does not know how to. And this was clearly a search of beauty. I will not underestimate the paradox of the thing, because you can put everything in a museum of modern art, and everything could be in principle a work of art, but there is this bizarre search of beauty in functional objects. Also, this is another very common experience. Where is the button? It's always is very well hidden, and the reason why is that is not beautiful. A button is not beautiful. Also, this in the train, if you sit, this is in Italy, which is special in order to the search of beauty. If you sit closer to the door, the people does not find the button because it's very, very well hidden, and there is sometimes a target who says the button is there, but the target, but the target is the tag is more evident than the button because it's functional and the button should be beautiful, and this makes that the people are always in stress in order to. And last empirical case, this was a surprising door in a train in Italy that existed for 20 years, more or less, which was a surprising example of design, because there was not an handle, but a bar, like this. And nothing on the bar could tell you whether you should be made this movement, or this movement, or this movement, or this movement. Since it was in local trains, you can be imprisoned in the train before the train stops. And this is a possible result. And I am sure that the reason was that they did this bar, very elemental, is beauty. And the search of beauty led people in this direction. Note that the search of beauty makes also this kind of tapestry that makes a multiple search of hidden buttons. Well, and this is in this range enters the centrality of architecture, because the supplementarity is architecture gives a supplement of beauty to art. This is needed, this is strictly needed. It's not the first need of the architecture is to give a supplementary beauty to the art. But it happens that in our century, or the last century, architecture became more and more important for art, because it was called to give this supplementary supplement of beauty. And this was a move. There are other strategies. For instance, if you there are people who say that Brillo box is the same thing like the urinatory of Duchamp. It's not the case at all, because it's not ready-made. It's made, it's constructed. greater than the original, has not the object inside, so it's the magnification of an object which is beautiful in itself, because the object put in the supermarket requires to be beautiful. And for instance, another strategy is the museum shop. Museum shop is a very singular object that exists more and more. There exists also the restaurant of the museum, which creates a form of reconfortation for the visitors, but like the white wine in the gallery. But the museum shop contains objects which are supposed to be beautiful because the people buy this object. They can buy the great object in the museum, but they buy those other objects, and they should be, at least in principle, beautiful because the people want to bring them in their home. Of course, not everything and not always they're beautiful. For instance, at the Metropolitan Museum there is cravat. How is the name? Pin, a tie with a lot of flower. I'm not sure that is so beautiful. Maybe the people say, but I buy him at the Metropolitan Museum. I don't know, but the existence of the museum shop re-enters in this supplementary way of helping art in its lack of beauty. And this also explains why, for instance, Punta della Dogana, you enter and you find several different kinds of work. There are beautiful work, ugly works, medium works, interesting works, not interesting at all works, as happens in every museum, not only the modern museum, not also if you go to the Louvre, it's the same story. But, and people enters, because the vocabulary of people is always a vocabulary of contemplation. They say, oh, how beautiful. It's false, because you can say it's beautiful, the need was not the beautiful. But what is interesting is that the context is classical beauty, a classical architectural beauty, and this is also the history of all the museums of modern art, which are also paradigmatic example of architecture. This I find not accidental. In fact, Frank Lloyd Wright made this museum in the moment, exactly in the moment in which there was this turn of the art. So you need this kind of museum in order to put this kind of work of art. So all the flourishing, I believe that there have been much more museum in the last century than in all the history before, also because the museum is a recent creation. But it's always created by, and sometimes also, by the need of supplement the art with the architecture. Sometimes with reproduced, not always, but in some cases it's reproduced the problem with the design, because this is Alvaro Siza's restoration of the Museum of Modern Art in Naples, Madre. A perfect and very, very smart restoration, but since also Alvaro Siza finds that buttons are not beautiful, he put only one button for all the building. There are no buttons in the building and no plugs in the building, and this creates problems, because if you want to read the newspaper, if the director wants to read the newspaper in the evening, you should make off the light in all of course. And this is nothing theoretical, but it's only practical. A moment in which modern and casual pop architecture can cooperate with ancient architecture. As you see, this is a placa in front of the Parthenon. And this is OVS supermarket. There is the light of the sun that illuminates this structure, this kind of mirror. The mirror brings a mystic rose light through the placa and hits a Byzantine church, which is mystically illuminated by the OVS supermarket. But this is a pure casual event. Or maybe not, who knows. Fourth point, monumentality. Architecture has to do with the space in the form of a monument. This is why usually an interesting philosophical question could be when a work becomes to be a work of architecture and not, for instance, of design, of interior design, and it becomes because it requires a certain size. It's a question of size. The architecture can be something small like this can be architecture in any case, and this is why. So, for instance, this is Zukov in front of the Red Place, and this is the Berlin Wall, this is Leipzig, this is Nisharki. All these kind of things are, there is an intrinsic, yes, I said that I wanted not to be an essentialist in this rhapsodic analysis of markers of architecture, but in a sense there is something which is intrinsically monumental in the architecture. And also there is something which is intrinsically documental. Architecture has to do with the time in the form of a document. I mean, this was the reason why at the very beginning I quoted Hölderlin, but what remained? Because I feel that it's not so evident that what remains is founded by the poets, because a poem can disappear and it's not always a catastrophe. Can be a catastrophe, cannot be a catastrophe, but in fact, the architecture remains much more. There is this kind of responsibility of the architecture which has to do with the time. The architect is always, at least in principle, because maybe that sometimes does not happen, has to do with the time and making now something which in principle will exist in 2000th century. Not in all the culture is so, we know that in Japan it's different and so on and so forth, but say the Occidental or ethnocentrical concept of architecture says that architecture to do with the time in the form of a document. And this is much more urgent today because the rest of the document of all age can disappear. What will remain of all our files, of emails, of text? They will disappear. They will clearly disappear. This will be a crucial problem, as we know, in the next decades. But what remains is, of course, things like this. Maybe that all that will remain of our age will be this one, like the most that remains of ancient time are objects of various sorts related to architecture. This is Belgrade, and you see still remains some signs of a work. So this is why architecture is a document much more durable than any other document. The memory of the work can disappear, but since these documents and monuments remains, then remain the memory of the world. Something similar in another sense happened with the Flakturm in Berlin, because you know it was built in so solid and German way that it was not possible to destroy it. The Allied renounced to destroy it. They put bombs inside, and they renounced. At a given moment, it was rebuilt with a museum of modern art, of course. And this is a destiny we should reflect on. And last consideration of the monument. There is also, to speak about this vocabulary of the intrinsic, there is also an intrinsic relationship, it's not me the first that know this point, that relates architecture to the death, because of, you usually make a comparison. The architecture has to do with life because people lives in the houses. Yes, but also the people dies and remains in coffins and graves. This is the Recoleta of Buenos Aires. The parents of Borges, which is graved he is graved in Geneva, I believe. This is Casares. You see also here monumental and documental. This is an horror scene in Recoleta in Buenos Aires. Really an impressive horror. But in fact, it's a city. It's bad, but a cemetery is a city. Is so to say the final city, and with real estate. And this is the town of Eva Peron, always with fresh flowers. And this is it is not something casual, I believe, accidental, that the first example of monumental architecture are the pyramids, which are at the same time document of the power of the pharaoh and the tomb of the pharaoh. This suggests to us this kind of. So I spoke of many various and not related things about architecture. It's like to speak, like Woody Allen joke about to speak about Anna Karenina. I spoke about Russia. But in fact, I'm convinced that the increasing historical role of architecture now is somehow related with the problem of contemporary art, is supplementary, and the essential role of architecture is related instead to this monumentality and documentality, which is related to the death, and not only to the life. And this is a quote that Jacques Derrida spoke in many cases of pyramids. This was clearly one of his examples of architecture. He put the pyramids in the beginnings of in the cover of glass, the popular edition. He speaks of the pyramids, for instance, Qui la Pyramide, the text on Hegel, and this is a passage of, also Hegel is obsessed by pyramids, but because of the recent discoveries of Champollion. And this is a quote from La Différence, who says, pyramid, not a limit to be trespassed, but a pier of stone on a wall to decipher in another way a text without voice. I believe that this text without voice is an excellent definition of architecture. Many thanks.